In this 90-minute video, we will walk through step by step how to create a full stack application that includes a UI wrote in NextJS and a backend with full authentication, registration, a database, and all that good stuff wrote in FastAPI. We'll be creating this app in 3 major steps. Step 1, we'll be creating the backend project in Python FastAPI. Step 2, we'll be creating authentication and registration, routes and databases and all that to create the entire functional aspect of the backend. Step 3, we will be creating a UI in Next.js so users can interact with the application. So overall, tons of great stuff jam-packed in this video. So go ahead and grab your tea or coffee. Today, I'm drinking from my St. Lucia cup, beautiful island in the Caribbean if you've never been. Now that you have that, let's go ahead and dive into the video. All right, so for this video, we are going to be building a full stack application utilizing Next.js and FastAPI. Now I have an empty screen for VS Code. Now, the very first thing I'm going to create is a new folder that's just going to be called FastAPI. And inside FastAPI, I'm going to create a new file called main.py. All right, and as you know, once we create this, I'm going to create a virtual environment. So if you're in VS Code, we can just come down here, say, hey, I want to create a new virtual environment of VE&V. And when we select one, it's going to create a virtual environment based on our Python dependency. Perfect. So now if we go ahead and open up a terminal, we can see that we're activated on our VE&V. Now, just to make sure that I have all of the dependencies that I need, I am going to create a new file called requirements.txt. And inside here, I'm going to just paste a bunch of dependencies just to make sure that mine and your application align with dependencies. These are pretty much the newest dependencies as of this video recording. So what I can do here is pip install -r requirements.txt. Oop, and I need to jump into the FastAPI directory first. All right, so now that we have all of our dependencies installed, I am going to go ahead and create a new folder called API. This is going to be the directory that holds all of our business logic for FastAPI. And I'm actually going to grab my main.py and stick it right inside here. So now our FastAPI directory should just be FastAPI with an API folder and requirements.txt, which has all of our dependencies. All right, and now inside our main.py, what we can do is just say from FastAPI, import FastAPI. And just to make sure everything works, we can say @app.get an empty slash, and I'm going to say def health check and just return a health check complete. And now the only thing we need to say above here is app equals FastAPI. And now what we can do is cd into API, and we can say FastAPI run main.py. And you can only use this command if you're running like the newest version of FastAPI. So once you do that, we can see that our application has kicked off. And now if we go into our docs, we can see our one health check API where if we execute it, we'll see health check complete. Perfect. All right. So now that we have our health check complete, we can go ahead and add a little bit more code. Now, the very first thing we need to do is add a middleware, and this middleware will allow us to be able to get past CORS errors that may come from our Next.js. So what we want to do here is make sure that we import from FastAPI.middleware.CORS import CORS middleware. And now underneath our app equals FastAPI, but before our app.get, let's go ahead and say app.add middleware, our CORS middleware. where our allow origins is equal to http:// Real quick, if you've enjoyed the video, please subscribe to be notified of upcoming videos. And check out my best-selling FastAPI course linked below. Localhost port 3000, which is our default NextJS port. And then allow credentials equals true. Allow methods equals a star. And allow headers equals a star. And this is just going to allow us to be able to consume all endpoints from localhost port 3000. All right, perfect. All right, so now the next thing we want to do is let's go ahead and create our database, and we can do that right here inside our API directory. So let's go ahead and say new file database.py. And inside here, we want to say from SQLAlchemy import create engine. From SQLAlchemy.ext.declarative import declarative base. From SQLAlchemy.orm import session maker. And then we want to create our URL for our SQLite. So we can say SQLAlchemy_database_URL. Equals our SQLite : /// so 3 slashes, workout_app.db, where our engine is equal to create engine, where we're going to pass in our SQLAlchemy database URL. With our connect arguments, which is only for our SQLite, equals our check same thread of false. Our session local is going to equal session maker with our auto commit equal to false. Our auto flush equal to false. And our bind equals engine. And then we want to declare our base by saying base equals declarative base. All right, perfect. And now the next thing that we want to do is create our models. So we're going to have users, we're going to have workouts, and we're going to have routines. So let's go ahead and create a new models.py. And now inside our models.py, we want to say from SQLAlchemy import column, integer, string, foreign key, and table. We then want to say from SQLAlchemy.orm import relationship. And then from.database import base. We then want to create an association table, so we can say workout_routine_association because we want workouts to be inside routines. So we can say equals table of our workout routine base.metadata. Where we're going to have two columns, a workout ID, which is an integer, and a foreign key to workouts.id. And a column, which routine ID, integer, and foreign key is routines.id. And now we want to create our three classes. So we can say class user base is equal to our underscore underscore table name underscore underscore equals user. Where our ID equals column, where we pass an integer, primary key equals true, and index is true. Username is equal to column, string unique equals true, index equals true. And then hash password equals column string. Perfect. And now we want to create a new class of workout, where we're going to have table name is equal to workouts, ID is the same as users, so column integer primary key equals true and index equals true. And then we want user ID to equal column integer foreign key is going to be our user's ID. Name equals column string index equals true. Description equals column string index equals true. And then we're going to create a routines class. But ahead of time, I'm going to create the relationship. So I can say routines equals relationship, routine, where we're going to pass in the secondary equals our workout routine association, back populates to our workouts. And then lastly, we want to say class routine base. Table name is routines with an ID, that's column integer, primary key equals true, and index equals true. And then user ID is going to be the same as workouts. So we can say column integer foreign key is user's ID with the name column string index equals true. Description is column string index equals true. But this time we're going to say workouts equals relationship. Workout secondary equals workout routine association, back populates to routine. So this just kind of gives an overview of the relationships allowed. So what we can say here is just simply workout.routines equals, and we can say this exact thing right here and just place it in there. All right, so once we have these models down, we can close out of all of these right now. And inside our API directory, let's go ahead and just create an initialization file by saying underscore underscore init underscore underscore .py. This is just for our folder structure later on to work as we are expecting. And let's go ahead and create a new .env file. Now this is just good practice for us to be able to stick certain things in here. Now the very first thing that we're going to need in here is an auth secret for our authentication. So let's go ahead and say auth underscore secret underscore key. And you can make this really whatever you want right here. I have this long string of random numbers and letters, but add anything you want right here. We want an auth algorithm. So we can say auth underscore algorithm. where here we can just say HS256 and then an API URL. And this is going to be the URL of the localhost that's coming in, which is going to be our Next.js. We can just say http://localhost port 3000. Perfect. All right, we can close out of this. Now let's go back into our API folder and create a new file called deps.py. Now this is going to be for our dependencies. So within our application, we're going to have some dependencies for authentication and for our database. And we're just going to make it a little cleaner by having all of our dependencies in one file. So what we can do here is say from typing import annotated from SQLAlchemy.orm import session. From FastAPI import depends, HTTP exception and status. From FastAPI.security import OAuth2 password bearer. From passlib.context import crypto context. From Jose, import JWT and JWT error. And then for our environmental variables, we can say from.env, import load.env, and import our operating system. And then lastly, from our own local files, we want to say from.database, import session local. We then want to load our .env. And then we can say our secret key for our application. So secret key is going to equal our os.getEnv auth secret key. And just to make sure we don't spell this incorrectly, go ahead and just open up your .env and paste that in here. And then our algorithm equals the exact same thing, except for we want to grab our auth algorithm. We then want to create our dependency for our database. So we can say def getDB. DB equals session local, try yield DB, and finally db.close. Perfect. We then want to say db underscore dependency equals annotated. Our session depends on getDB, so we're setting up our dependency injection. We can then say bcrypt context equals crypt context. Schemas of bcrypt and deprecated is auto. OAuth2 bear equals OAuth2 password bearer with our token URL of auth/token. And our OAuth2 bearer dependency, which is equal to annotated string depends OAuth2 bearer. All right, and now once we have all these imports and dependency injection set up, we can do our get current user, which is what we're going to be using to be able to fetch our current user. So we can say async def get current user, pass in our token of OAuth2 bearer dependency. We can try and unload the JWT. So we can say payload equals JWT.decode, where we pass in our token, secret key, and algorithms of algorithm. Our username is going to be of type string, which is going to equal our payload.getSub. Our user ID is going to be an integer, which is equal to payload.getID. And if username is none or user ID is none, well, then we want to raise an HTTP exception where the status code equals status.http 401 unauthorized. And our detail is equal to could not validate user. And if that works out well, then we can just return our username of username and ID of user ID. However, if anything fails, well, that means we're having a JWT error. So we can raise our HTTP exception, throw in a status code, which is equal to status.http 401 unauthorized with a detail of could not validate user. Lastly, we want to say user dependency equals our annotated of dictionary depends get current user. And that is our last step for our dependency injection setup. All right, and once we add that, we can close out of our dependencies and we can start working on our routers. All right, so now the next thing we need to do is set up our routers. So inside our API folder, let's go ahead and create a new folder called routers. And the first thing we want to do is create a new file with __init__.py. All right. And now inside here, let's go ahead and say new file auth.py. Now inside here, we need to set up a few things. Now, again, it's going to start with all of our imports. So we can say from datetime, import time delta, datetime time zone. You can then say from typing, import annotated. From FastAPI, import API router, depends, and HTTP exception. Import status. From Pydantic, import base model. From FastAPI.security, import OAuth2 password request form. From Jose, import JWT. From .env, import load.env. And import OS. And now our imports from our own files is from API.models, import user. And from API.dependencies, import DB dependency and bcrypt context. All right, and now what we want to do is say load.env which is going to load all of our environmental variables from our .env file. We then want to set up our router. So router equals API router, where we're going to have our prefix of this file be /auth, and then our tag is going to be auth within our Swagger documentation. We need to set up our secret key and algorithm, which is secret key is going to equal our os.getEnv from our auth secret key, and our algorithm is going to be os.getEnv auth algorithm. We then want to set up some of our Pydantic requests. So we can say class user create request of base model is username of string and password of string. And our class token, which is also going to be of base model, where our access token is string and our token type is string. All right, and now we want to create some functionality for our authentication. So what we can say here is def authenticate user, where we're going to pass in a username of type string, password of type string, and a DB. And we're getting our DB from our dependencies. And then we can say user.db.query user.filter user.username equals username.first. If not user, return false. So if user doesn't come back from a database. If not, bcrypt context.verify the password and the user hash password. So we're going to encrypt the password to see if it matches the password that's in the database. Return false. If so, return user. We then want to say create our access token. So we can say def create access token. Where our username of string, user ID of int, and expires delta of time delta. We want to encode our JWTs. So we can say encode equals brackets sub of username ID of user ID. Expires equals datetime.now. timezone.utc plus expires delta. With the encode.update of our exp of expires. And lastly, return the JWT.encode, encode secret key and algorithm, which is equal to our algorithm. Once we have that, we can create our endpoint for create user. We can say @router.post, which is going to be an empty slash with our status code that's equal to status.http 201 created. Async def create user DB of our DB dependency, create user request of user create request. Where we're going to have create user model equals user, where we pass in our username, which is equal to our create user request.username. And our hash password, which is going to be our bcrypt context.hash. And then we're passing in our create user request password. So we're going to encrypt and hash the user password. And then we want to add our create user model to the DB and then commit it. And then lastly, we want to be able to create a token and return that token so we can be authenticated and use that for like authorization. So we can say @router.post/token response underscore model equals token. Where our async def login for access token is going to be our form data of annotated OAuth2 password request form using our dependency injection and our DB of DB dependency. User equals authenticate user form data.username and form data.password and passing in our DB. So we're going to be creating a form data of our username and password. If not user, well, then we want to raise our HTTP exception of status code equals status.http 401 unauthorized with the detail could not validate user. But if user is valid, then we want to create a token, which is equal to create access token, which is our function above. User.username, user.id with a time delta of minutes equals 20. And then lastly, we just want to return that token. So we can say return access token of token with token type of bearer. All right, and then after we do that, let's go into our main.py, where right under app equals FastAPI and right before app.add middleware, let's go ahead and say base.metadata.createAll. Bind equals engine. And we need to import this. So say from.database import base and engine. And then we want to say from.routers import auth. And then right under our health check, let's go ahead and say app.include router auth.router. Perfect. All right, let's go back into our terminal and let's go ahead and say FastAPI run main.py. Let's go back into our application where we can now see that there's two more auths right here. Let's go ahead and say create user, where I'm going to say try it out, and my username is going to be coding with Roby. And my password is going to be test1234 ! And click execute. And we can see that it might have worked because we got a 201. So now if we go into our auth token and we say try it out, we can pass in our username of coding with Roby, and our password is test1234 ! And if we execute, we can see it all worked and we got our access token right here. Perfect stuff. All right, so now if we go back into our application, we can start working on our next route. And we can see right here in our directory of API, we have our new database workout_app.db. Now that we have our auth created, let's go ahead and create workouts. So inside our routers, let's go ahead and create a new file called workouts.py. And now inside workouts, we want to say from Pydantic import base model, from typing import optional, and from FastAPI import API router in status. And then from our own files, we want to say from API.models import workout, from API.deps for dependencies, import DB dependency and user dependency. And then we want to say router equals API router, where our prefix is /workouts and our tags is workouts. Let's go ahead and create two classes. So class workout base, which is part of base model in Pydantic, we'll say name is string, and our description is an optional string that is equal to none. And then we want to say class workout create, which is part of our workout base that we just created. And we're just going to say pass inside. And here we're going to create a couple endpoints. We're going to say @router.get/, where we're going to have def get workout, where DB of type DB dependency, user of user dependency. So our authentication is going to be required. And then workout ID is an integer. We then want to say return db.query of workout.filter workout.id equals our workout ID.first. So we're going to get the first record in our database that matches that ID. And then let's go ahead and create a new endpoint which fetches all of the workouts. So we can say @router.get workouts. Def get workouts DB of DB dependency. User of user dependency. And then we can say return db.query workout.all. We want to be able to create a new workout. So we can say @router.post/, and then we want to say status code equals status.http 201 created. Def create workout, pass in our DB of DB dependency, user of user dependency, and workout, which is our workout create. DB workout equals workout, where we want to do ** workout.model dump to convert all of this into a workout. And then we want to add our last variable of user ID, which is equal to our user.getID. Let's go ahead and do db.add db workout, db commit, and db refresh our db workout so we can return our db workout back to the screen. And then next we want to delete a workout, so we can say @router.delete, which is going to be an empty path, and then def delete workout, db of db dependency, user of user dependency, and then we'll pass in our workout ID of type integer. We can say db workout equals db.query, where we're going to pass in our workout, .filter workout.id equals our workout ID.first. If db workout, well, then we want to do a db.delete our workout and then commit this db and then return the db that we just deleted. All right, so now we can go ahead and run our application. What we actually need to do after we start that up, let's go into our main, and right here, let's do comma workouts. And then we can do pretty much the same thing right here, except for this is going to now be workouts. So we now have two routers attached. Rerun our application in our terminal. Go back into our browser and refresh. And something new that we have is this authorize button up here. And that's because we have some locked APIs now. And this lock means that authentication needs to happen. So let's go ahead and just say username is going to be my coding with Roby and my password is test1234! And once you click authorize, this will automatically attach our bearer token to these requests. So if we come in here and we say we want to create a new workout, we can say name is pushups. And the description for this is do 20 pushups. And we can say execute. If we scroll down, we can see that it was created successfully. If we go ahead and we say, let's do another one real quick actually. Let's make this sit-ups. And we'll say do 30 sit-ups. Execute again. If we go ahead and say get all workouts and we say try it out and execute, we can see that we get all of the workouts. Now, if we go into this first one, we can pass in an ID, and this fetches the single workout. So this is push-ups has an ID of 1, while sit-ups have an ID of 2. Let's go ahead and create a fake one. So I'm just going to say test, and I'm going to say test again, execute. And now let's go ahead and get all of them once more. We can say execute, and we get them all. Well, this one doesn't really make sense, and it has an ID of 3. So inside our delete, we can just go ahead and pass in an ID of 3. We can see that that workout was deleted, if we see right here. And now if we go back into our get all of our workouts, we can see that it's just back to push-ups and sit-ups. All right, cool. So now we have a 2 workouts, push-ups and sit-ups. What we want to do now is go ahead and create routines. Now, a routine is like a complete workout. So a workout is like push-ups or sit-ups, while a routine is maybe doing both push-ups and sit-ups. All right, we want to create something called routines.py. All right, so now that we have pretty much everything done, let's go ahead and go into routers, say new file, and we want to create something called routines.py. All right, and now inside routines, we want to say from Pydantic, import base model. From typing, import list and optional. From FastAPI, import API router. And then from SQLAlchemy.orm, import joined load. And now from our own dependencies, we want to say import API.models, import workout, and we want to import our routine. And then from our dependencies, we can say from API deps, import DB dependency and user dependency. Router equals API router with a prefix of /routines and tags of routines. All right, so now we want two more classes. So we can say class routine base, and we pass in our base model, name of type string, and description of optional string, which is equal to none. And then class routine create, which is going to be passing in routine base, and then workouts, which is going to be our list of integers. So we're going to be saving a list of integers, and then when we do our SQL query, we are going to be fetching the workouts along with all the information of a routine. And we're going to be using joined load to do that. So how we can do this, we can say @route.get/ where we want to get routines. So inside here, we can say @router.get routines, def get routines. DB dependency, user of user dependency. We then want to say return DB query of routine.options. Where we pass in a joined load routine.workouts. Filter routine.userid equals user.getid.all. So what we're doing here is we are able to create workouts and everybody will be able to see the workouts. But what we can do now is create our own personal routines based on these workouts. We can create a new routine for ourselves by doing an @router.post/ def create routine. Where we pass in our DB of DB dependency, user of user dependency, and our routine of routine create. DB routine equals routine, where we pass in name equals routine.name, description equals routine.description, and user ID equals user.get, and we're going to pass in our ID. And then we want to say for workout ID in our routine workouts. So we're going to be fetching each workout, and we can say workout equals db.query workout.filter workout ID equals workout ID first. If workout, so if it's true, if it's valid in the database, well, then we want to do a db routine.workouts.append workout. Lastly, we want to say db.add our db routine, db commit, and then db refresh our db routine. And now just so we can see what it returns, we can say db routines equals db query routine.options joined load routines.workouts.filter routine.id equals db routine.id.first. And then lastly, just return that db routines. And we're going to want to be able to delete our own personal routines. So we can't really delete workouts, but we can delete routines. So let's go ahead and say @router.delete with a slash as our path, def delete routine, db of db dependency, user of user dependency, and routine ID of int. db routine equals db.query routine.filter routine ID equals routine ID.first. If our db routine is valid in the database, well, then we want to go ahead and delete that db routine, commit the database, and then return our db routine. All right, so now once we got that, let's bring up our terminal again. Let's rerun our application. Go back into our browser. Let's refresh everything. Let's go into our main. Up here, we now need to pass in routines. And then right here, let's go ahead and just say routines.router to add it to our application. Let's rerun our application. Go back to our browser, refresh the page, and here we can see our routines. Let's log in. Authorize. And now let's go ahead and create a routine. So to create a routine, we need a name. So I'm going to say the name is full body workout. And the description is going to be this routine works your whole body. And then our workouts, we need to pass in an integer. Well, we remember that there's two workouts. So if we look at them both real quick, we need to pass in the ID. So we can see that IDs are 1 and 2. So here we want to pass in 1, 2 and execute. And here is our full routine. We can see that the name is full body workout. Description is this routine works your whole body. The user that created it has an ID of 1, and this routine has an ID of 1. And inside has 2 workouts, the push-ups and sit-ups. So if we come over here and we say, hey, we want to fetch all of them, we can see that there's the routine for this user. Now I'm going to create another one, which is just going to have identical data, but a different ID. So we can see that there is now 2 routines, this routine and this one, but this one has an ID of 2. We are just going to go ahead and delete it just so we can make sure that this is working properly. So once we do that, we can see that that routine was deleted. And if we come back up here and we say execute again, boom, we're back to one routine that has both workouts inside. So what the next thing we need to do is just go ahead and close all of our folders and all of our code. And then we can go ahead and just shut this terminal real quick. Awesome stuff. We now have our FastAPI application ready to go with authentication, some little bit of authorization. And now we're ready to create our NextJS front-end part that'll bring this whole application to life. And this is awesome stuff. And I will see you right here where we get back into it. We need to create our NextJS application. All right. So now that we have our FastAPI complete, we need to create our NextJS application. And we can do that by opening up a new terminal. Remember, we need both applications running at one point. So I'm going to leave this first terminal open for FastAPI, and the second one is going to be for Next.js. And make sure you already have Node.js installed on your computer. You can get that by Googling how to download Node.js. But after you get that, what we need to do is npx create next app, where I'm going to name this just Next.js. And then click enter. It's going to ask you what version. I'm going to say yes. And there's going to be a couple different notices. So I'm not going to be using TypeScript. We do not need ESLint. We do not need Tailwind CSS. We want a source directory. We want our app router. We do not need an alias. All right, so now we have our Next.js application. The first thing we want to do is cd into our new Next.js directory. And let's go ahead and do an npm install for Axios and Bootstrap. This will just make development speed a little bit quicker. All right, so once we're inside our source, we should have an app folder inside of this. Now inside our app folder, let's go ahead and create a new folder, and this is going to be called context. Now inside context, we want to create a new file, and this is going to be auth.context.js. And this is what's going to be holding a lot of our authentication and authorization logic. So the very beginning, let's go ahead and just type in use client. And let's go ahead and do import create context use state from React. Import Axios from Axios. Import use router from next/navigation. Where our const auth context is equal to create context. We want to export const auth provider equals parentheses, brackets, children, arrow function into 2 pieces of state. Well, 1 piece of state, const user, set user equals use state of null. And const router equals use router. All right. Now, the next thing we want to do inside here is const login equals async, where we pass in our username and password, arrow function, and then inside here, we want to say try const form data equals new form data. Where we can say form data.append username. Form data.append password. And here we're going to call our FastAPI application. So we can say const response equals await axios.post. Where we pass in http / localhost port 8000 / auth / token. We're going to pass in our form data of username and password. And then inside here, we want to create headers of content type application / x www-form URL encoded because of our form data. We then want to say axios.defaults.headers.common of authorization to equal our bearer response.data.access token. So when we get the response of our token, we want to add that to our default Axios. We then want to add that token to our local storage. So we can say local storage.set item of token to be our response.data.access token. Set user to response.data router.push / and then catch our error if something happens, where we can just console log login failed. And then we want to create a new function for logout. So const logout equals parentheses arrow function. Set user to null, delete axios.defaults.headers.common of authorization, and then we'll push the user to login. And at the very end, we just want to return the auth context.provider value of our user login and logout to all of the children. And then lastly, export default auth context. All right, and after we do that, let's go ahead and create a new folder inside app that is called components. And inside components, let's go ahead and create a new JavaScript file called protected route. All right, and now inside here, we want to say use client, import, use context, and use effect from React. Import use router from next navigation, and then import auth context that we just created from /context/auth context. We then want to create a new const protected route, which is equal to our children arrow function. We're going to say const user is equal to use context of our auth context, and use router is equal to our use router. We want a small use effect where we're going to say if user is none or not available, we're going to say router.push login, and we're going to have the use effect recall based on the user and route. Then we can say return user question mark children colon null export default protected route. All right, perfect. Now we can close out of both of these. All right, and now the next thing we want to do is create a new folder in app, and we're going to call this login. And now inside our login directory, let's go ahead and create a new file called page.js. And now inside page, we will say use client, import use context and use state from React. Import auth context from our context auth context. We then want to say const login equals parentheses arrow function const login of use context of our auth context. Then we want to create two pieces of state, one for username and one for password. We then want to say const handle submit equals E, and then an arrow function that says we want to prevent the event from happening, and then log in to our function of username and password. And then for this next part, which is mostly HTML, go ahead and just paste it from the code that's provided below. We're going to do that for the HTML because it can get long typing in all these class names. But really what we're doing is we're just creating a new container that just says login, where a user can type in their username and password, click the login button, and then we call this functionality and this login functionality, which brings us to our auth context login that we just created. And then lastly, we can wrap this up by saying export default login. Perfect. And now let's go into our layout.js that is already created. Here, there are a few things that we want to add in to our imports and a few things that we want to add into our root layout. So let's go ahead and add the imports first. So right here, we can go ahead and just delete everything right here, except for our globals.css. First, we want to import our Bootstrap CSS. So we can say import bootstrap /dist/css/bootstrap.min.css. We then want to say import auth provider from /context/auth context. And then right here, it says export default function root layout of children. We want to return, and above this HTML, we want to wrap auth provider. And then right here where it says body of class name, we can just go ahead and remove this class name and just say, hey, we just want to return a children of our body. And now the very last thing that we need to do is go into your web browser and grab bootstrap.com. Once you're here, scroll down until you can see this JavaScript bundle. It's going to be a long script right here. Just go ahead and grab the one that talks about JavaScript. Go back into the code and we can paste this right above the second body. Now, because we're using NextJS, scroll all the way over where you see cross origin, go ahead and just make that a capital O. So cross capital O for origin. All right. Now, for the very last thing, hop into your page JS, the one that is default that came with the project. And what we're going to do here is just copy and paste all of it because this is a ton of code. And this will just stretch out this video and make it super long. But we're going to have another use client with use context, use state, use effect, our auth context, protected route, and our Axios. We have our user and our logout coming from our auth context with our workouts, set workouts, routines, set routines, workout name, set workout name, workout description, all of this as pieces of state in our application. We have a token, which is going to be our local storage of get token. And this token is going to be our JWT. Here inside our use effect, where we fetch our workouts and routines, we have all of our APIs set up to connect to our FastAPI application. So we have our workout/workouts, which just gets everything. And then we have our workout, then we just have our routines, which is just /routines. We then want to set up all of this. And we throw an error if something's wrong inside. We can also create new workouts here, create new routines, and then here we have all of the code, which is a bunch of HTML, which just makes our application look a little bit better when we're trying to present all of the data. So what we can do here is go into your FastAPI terminal and say FastAPI run main.py to get everything started. And then over here, we can say npm run dev. This will start up our NextJS application. From here, we can go to our localhost port 3000. It should automatically redirect us to login. All right, and then we type in our username of Coding with Roby and our password of test1234 exclamation mark. All right, it says create workout, create routine. It says your routines, which is a full body workout. This routine works your whole body with push-ups, do 20 push-ups, and sit-ups, do 30 sit-ups. Now, what we can do is we can create new workouts. So let's say we wanted to add like squat. And the workout description is do 5 squats. And we say create workout. And then we want to do some lunges. So maybe we want to say lunges. And we want to do 10 lunges. Well, what we can do now is go to create routine, where the routine name is going to be lower body workout. The routine description is get legs swole. And here we can see all of our workouts. What we want to do is grab squats and lunges. You can do that by like clicking your control button. So control lets you click around. So I'm going to say lunges and squats. We're going to say create routine. All right, and there we have it. We created our full stack application using NextJS and FastAPI. All right, and now there's one more piece that we want to get to be able to register a user. Because we can log in, we can do all that kind of stuff. We want to be able to register a user, right? So let's go inside page.js. All right, now inside our page.js, we need to create 2 new pieces of state right here under username and password. We want register username and we want register password. So we can say const register username, set register username equals a use state, and then the same thing for password. All right, and then after this, let's go down to where you see handle submit. Let's go right under handle submit and let's create a new handle register. And we can do this by saying const handle register equals async, where we're going to pass an E, just like we're doing up here, of brackets, e.prevent default. And now we want to try and register our user. So we can say try const response equals await axios.post. Where it's going to be our http localhost port 8000 /auth. Where we're going to pass in our username of register username and our password of register password. And then we want to say login, register username, and register password. So we're automatically going to log in once a user successfully creates an account. If anything goes wrong, we want to catch it. So we can say catch error, console.error, failed to register user of error. All right, and then once we do that, since we're going to be using Axios, you might see this red line. That just means we need to come up here and import Axios. All right, and now let's go ahead and make an area for us to be able to, oops, this is actually a space right here. But we still need to make sure that we have this Axios right here. And then let's scroll down until you can see this login form. Now, right at the end of this form, let's go ahead and just paste in the register HTML code from the code provided. This will allow us to just be able to simply add the register in here, which will just make this part significantly quicker. This is just going to be a form where we can submit a new user. So now if we go back into our application, we can see that there's now a register along with a user. So now if we go ahead and try coding with Roby, test 1, 2, 3, 4, exclamation mark right here, we can see that we log in and we can see our routines. If we log out and we register a new user, so I'm going to say new user, password is just test, and I say register, it's going to successfully submit the new user, log in with that user, and here we can see there's workouts that we can create, and it's going to have all the original workouts because all the users share the same workouts, but they don't share the same routines. So boom, now we have a full stack application that has login and register functionality, which have their own routines and can share workspaces. Sweet stuff, and I'll see you in the next video.